I started out life as an opera singer and being a bass, all the parts were character parts, so I was interested obviously in makeup. I was performing on one or two television programs and I showed the makeup department some noses and things that I'd made. And they said, "Oh, can you make some for us?" So I said, "Yes, well, I suppose so, yes." I started making one or two things, and then, of course, it was the beginning of the British period drama series. The next thing was I was deeply involved in aging and making anything from teeth to facial prosthetics or body prosthetics from I, Claudius, Edward VII, Strauss family, and so on. These are some old casts. We put them up there. They've been there for 30 years, most of those. We ran out of space there long ago. I think I've got a collection of about 7,000 plaster casts of actors and actresses. Most are in the garage. Daryl Hannah up there. Or there's Angela Lansbury up there. That's a cast of De Niro, I think you're looking at, the tall one. And next to him on his right is Peter Sellers, Lee Remick, Gregory Peck, David Niven, John McEnroe, Klaus Maria Brandauer, Laurence Olivier, Benny Hill, John Gielgud. And then down here there's Maggie Smith. Laurence Olivier again, another Laurence Olivier. They were done at different times. Oops. Then a phone call came from a production manager that I knew and said, "We're doing The Elephant Man and they want to know where they can get some polyurethane foam." I said, "What's it for?" He said, "Well, they want to make the prosthetics or something." I said, "Well, it doesn't sound right to me. It's not going to work. Who's doing the makeup?" And he said, "Well, the director, David Lynch." So I thought, well, this is a fine turnaround. Why bother with makeup people at all? The director might as well do the lot. He could light it, direct, he could do a Charlie Chaplin, who seemed to do pretty much everything. Anyhow, he rang back about a week later saying, no, that didn't work. Where could he get silicone foam? I said, well, it's the same answer. It's not going to work. They kept away from me what David Lynch had done, although the wardrobe lady, to be true, she did show me the thing he'd made for the chest, which was a sort of thin latex shell, a bit like a rubber glove, you could almost say, that just draped in front, and he'd put some cent coins in the breast just to weigh down the... and it looked, well, I think there's nothing one could add to that description. The legs were, the feet were encased in silicone foam, and the trouble was he put Velcro on the inside, so of course once he was in these things he couldn't get out. There was no way of opening them up except tearing them, so it was really a non-starter. About a week later they rang up in a panic and said they hadn't got a film and they hadn't got an Elephant Man, and they were due to start shooting on Monday. And there really was a mega panic. They said, well, would you like to come round to the London Hospital Museum and have a look at the last mortal remains of the Elephant Man? The idea, of course, was to get me drawn into this thing. The appropriate ones, like the skeleton and so on, I said, oh, if I could have them on the premises, it would be helpful. And the curator was very helpful, and he said, yes, all right, well, we'll arrange for them to be shipped over to you, and they brought them. And the bust of him had little bits of hair sticking out, so we knew the colour of the hair as well. You know, the skin when you're dead is loose and flop. There's nothing holding it in place, so obviously you do get a lot of distortion, and it's not terribly... It is helpful up to a point, but only up to a point. I had the photographs which, although they were extremely poor in the way of resolution, at least I could figure out what was what with that combined with the cast. So I knew pretty well what he looked like, fairly accurately. It was a matter of transferring as much of that as we could into John Hurt. The deformity was severe. The normal average human circumference around the head is 22.5 and slightly less for girls. For men it's about 22.5 or 23. The elephant man was some 36 inches around the circumference, just for starters. The neck was grossly deformed, giving them a collar size of about 30 something or more because of this huge deformity. And the only way I found to do that was to make two lots of prosthetics. In other words, I had to design something that would distort John Hurt into something that I could then model the elephant man on top of, with the edges coming in, and all the joints coming in the right place and all the overlaps coming in the right place, because it comprised of some 15 sections that all had to overlap. And the two sections that made up the head, the top part, which had hair implanted, that had to be reusable. So it was very complex. This is alginate, and we spread it all over his face. Well, we did his entire head. You could do the back half first and then come round to the front. And then we take it off and then reassemble it again and then fill it up with plaster. We've got a cigarette hanging out of his mouth there. They insured me for £2 million. They obviously thought I might get run over by a bus. There was a fat lot of chance of that. I never got out the door. The longest day we did, working non-stop, was 49 hours. That's 49 hours without going to bed. Because it's so extreme, you've got a problem for a start, because the people are looking at the makeup saying, oh, where are the joints? That's the first thing they do. Where does it all, you know, oh, that's the makeup there, is it? So the last thing I wanted was that. So therefore it had to be super realistic in order for them not to think of that. I didn't want them to think about the makeup. I wanted them to watch the performance. The real elephant man had very thick lips, but I had visions of Al Jolson and Mummy, and I really wanted to keep away from these very thick fleshy lips, and John Hurt was a bit concerned too. So we gave him normal lips, and I made a few modifications like that to make it work for John Hurt. And I said, well, if I try and distort the mouth more, so that it gives you something to sort of fight against, if you like, because people who've got deformities, if their lip is sort of raised, for example, they'll try and, when they're talking to a stranger, they try and look normal, so they try and pull it down. You get this interaction. I did a similar trick on the Phantom of the Opera. We did a similar thing with Michael Crawford, and it does help them. It gives them something to really think about. The art of makeup is to alter somebody's appearance without it being seen what you've actually achieved. The idea is to help the actor portray the part in whatever way you can. It was about 8 weeks it took us to get the head and enough moulds made so that we could repeat every mould. Like the berries of 15 sections, a lot of them had to be duplicated or triplicated so that we could start mass production to make enough appliances to keep them going, so that we could then concentrate on doing all the body sections. The right arm and all the rest. His left arm was, of course, normal. Of course, that Anthony Hopkins had a stop date on his passport because he was a tax exile. He had only allowed to be in the UK for so many months, and that was rapidly nearing its end. So they had to shoot most of the stuff on Anthony Hopkins was shot before the Elephant Man was actually built. They obviously had to accommodate that one. He had a hat with a bit of cloth over the face to simulate him disguising himself, which historically I think he actually did do on occasion when he went out. Every time David Lynch has been interviewed, he's always said that Christopher Tucker saved my life. I'm profoundly thankful that it actually worked when it might not have done. It didn't happen just like that. It had to come with lots of thought and concentration at the time.